once again to our Genesis to Revelations yearly study. Today's chapters are Genesis chapters 37 to 39, verses for you to observe and consider. I do sometimes refer to other topics in these verses, anything that may be relevant. Today we deal with Joseph's dreams, and I'll be talking a little bit about speaking in tongues in that section. Joseph becomes a slave in Egypt. Judah and Tamar, which is chapters 38, where she played a harlot, and I may talk about some of the laws goes with that, where talks about when Judah found out she was playing the harlot, he suggested that she be burnt. Why burnt? And then lastly, Joseph and Potiphar's wife. So let me start at 37 verse 2, which reads, "These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father the evil report." So these are the two maids of Leah and Rachel. And here we are seeing they're not called concubines, but they are called wives. Now Joseph is the 11th son of the 12 sons of Jacob, the last being Benjamin. I'm going to come on to the part where Joseph has a dream. He narrates it to his family, and they all were able to understand its meaning. So in verses 5 it says, "And Joseph had dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamt. For behold, we were by," and he tells them the dream. And then they answer, "Shall indeed," this is verse 8, and his brethren said to him, "Shall thou indeed reign over us, or shall thou indeed have dominion over us?" And they hated him yet the more. So they heard the dream in the Hebrew language, whatever language it was he told them, and they were also able to interpret the meaning of what that dream meant. So interpret, as I say when we come to First Chronicles chapters 14, First Corinthians chapter 14, people think to interpret means to translate it. So people today speak in tongues in whatever inaudible English or foreign language that no one knows what they're saying, and then someone else will say try to translate it. That is not what the Bible means, or Paul meant when he says to interpret. When we study the history of speaking in tongues, of the modern day speaking in tongues, we'll see that is something that they brought up in the 1900s. So let me just give you some examples. For example, from Corinthians 14. What it means to interpret is just like happens here, where you can understand the language and you can also know the meaning of what the signs has been said to you. So Paul in Corinthians 14:5 says, "I would that you all spake with tongues, but rather that you prophesy. For greater is he that prophesieth than he that speaketh with tongues, except he interpret, that the church may receive advice." So the same speaker must also be the he that interprets, just like in this episode of Genesis 37. Another verse is Corinthians 14:13, "Wherefore let him that speaketh in an unknown tongue pray that he may interpret." The same person does both jobs. And lastly, verse 15, "What is it then? I will pray with the spirit, and I will pray with the understanding also." You have to possess two things. "I will sing with the spirit, and I will sing with the understanding also." You must understand the language and the understanding of what you're saying. And verse 27, "If any man speak with an unknown tongue, let it be by two, or at the most by three, and that by course let one interpret." That is one of the speakers. But even if you want to use it to be someone else than the speakers, where it really should be the speakers, one of the speakers, then at least everyone must understand the language is spoken of, but they may not know the meaning of it. So someone will say, well, this is the message of that, of what we just heard. we should see the same when we come to Daniel's prophecies. Now, in 14:22, 1 Corinthians 14:22, it says, "Wherefore tongues are for a sign, not to them that believe, but to them that believe not. But prophesying serveth not for them that believeth not, but for them which believe." Now, Joseph's brethren and parents in this Genesis 37 questioned whether this dream he had was legitimate and whether they were really going to be bowing down to him, one of the youngest of the family. But by the time we come to the end of Genesis, they would know when they come to get food from him, and he is the ruler, second ruler in Egypt. They can look back on the dream and interpretation that he gave them in 8:17 at Genesis 37 verse 8, and know that it was of God. And that is what tongues are about, Paul says in Corinthians. They're not for the believer, but the unbeliever, so that they will know that this thing is of God. They understood the language, and they saw the words they understood the language also came true.
And as I said, we'll see similar examples to that of Joseph's dreams being interpreted, being understood, as in Genesis chapters 40 verses 8 to 14, when he's in prison and interprets the dreams of the two other prisoners, in 41 verse 12, and also in Daniel chapters 2, statue of Babylon, chapters 4, chapters 5, again interpreting dreams, and chapter 7 verse 16.
As the interpretation that was given. Okay, back to Genesis chapter 37:20. Which is the next verse I want to come to. It reads, "Come now therefore, and let us slay him and cast him into some pit, and we will say, some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." There you see, they were unbelievers in his dreams. So whether the brothers took Joseph's dreams seriously or just wanted to show Joseph he was not a prophet, we are not told, but it did affect their thoughts. So, as I said, you're supposed to read the chapters to see what the story is. The next point I want to bring out is verse 22, when they conspired to throw him in the pit and kill him. "And Reuben said unto them, Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him." Now, Reuben is the same person, same son, who went in onto his father's concubine, one of the maids, in Genesis chapter 35:22. So here we see a different character. In one place he's does something that's not nice, and here he's trying to be an honourable person. And later on in the story we see that whilst he was away, they sell Joseph, so that when he comes back to rescue Joseph from the pit, thinking he's there, he's no longer there. So Joseph is sold into Egypt via some Ishmaelites, as it says in verse 27. And we may remember these Ishmaelites are descendants of Ishmael, Abraham's first son. So at that time they all moved around, lived in the same area, and they were not enemies. Then we come down to 37:36, where the Midianites sold Joseph into Egypt onto Potiphar, an officer. Now in Hebrew, it means he was a eunuch of Pharaoh's and the captain of the guard. So Potiphar, being a eunuch, i.e. castrated, may have given the reason why his wife acted as she did to Joseph. Okay, chapter 38, verse 1. "And it came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brethren and turned into a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. And he took her and went in unto her. And she conceived and bare a son, and he called his name And she conceived again and bare a son. She called his name Onan. And yet she conceived again and bare a son. And she called his name Silla. And he was at Sizib when she bare him. Verse 6. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. So that's where we get the perspective. So Judah married a Canaanite woman, as we saw people intermarried in other chapters. And he also took a wife for his son. So again, I'm just another highlight of the composition of the family of Israel, which will later become the nation of Israel. Now Judah was born via Leah, chapters 35-23, the daughter of Laban, but we do not know the nationality of her mother. Thus bloodline is fully unknown in these intermarriages. Judah has 3 sons, the first 2 of which dies, leaving only Shelah. He is from a Canaanite woman. Lastly, Judah himself has twins with Tamar, a Canaanite woman. Those twins, Silla, and their offspring will go on to form part of Israel. Thus the lineage and the colour, is what I'm using this for, to make the point, of Judah and his subsequent offspring is a mixture of Hebrew and Gentiles, or in Judah's case, yes, it is a mixture of Hebrew, because Judah came from Leah. Right, for the next point, I'll come on to verse 8. And Judah said unto Onan, Go in unto thy brother's wife, we shall come to that with the law in a minute, law of God, and marry her, and raise up seed to thy brother. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his, and it came to pass when he went in unto his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest that he should give seed to his brother. Verse 10. And the thing which he did displeased Yahweh God, wherefore God slew him also, as he slew his elder brother who did something wickedness. Verse 11. Then said Judah to Tamar his daughter-in-law, Remain a widow at thy father's house till Selah my son be grown. So another example of how the law that we'll later see was passed on to Israel through Moses was there from before.
Now we notice that the marry her was the result of go in onto her. By consent, obviously, not by a rape or that kind of a situation.
Because all of this is within God's law, and which is why he killed the first son, Onan, for not following the law, and leaving the last son, Silla, in line to perform the law. This is the same thing that happened with Ruth. In Ruth chapters 4 verses 1 to 8, and it's based on Deuteronomy chapters 25 verse 5, which reads, If brethren dwell together, and one of them die, and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without, basically outside the family, without unto a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in unto her, and take her to him to wife, and perform the duty of an husband's brother unto her. Deuteronomy 25 verse 6. And it shall be that the firstborn which she beareth shall succeed in the name of his brother which is dead, that his name be not put out of Israel. Now yesterday I had a question where someone was a bit confused, thinking that some of the things that were done was against God. For example, when with Noah in Genesis chapters 9 verses 22 or thereabouts. We know God drank, and Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his nakedness and told his 2 brethren outside. And that was something against God, because it says you should not uncover your father's nakedness. And we can see that he was cursed, and that was a bad thing to do. However, when it comes to Lot's 2 daughters, who thought that there's going to be no men to marry them and raise up seed for the father, they had children via their father Lot, and the Bible nor God says anything was wrong with that. And I made a point that this is slightly different morally because they were doing it to preserve the seed, as we just read in God's instructions here, of their father's name. In other words, although Leviticus 18 verse 7 says the nakedness of thy father or the nakedness of thy mother shall thou not uncover, the nakedness is really how can I put it, an immoral nakedness. What the daughters were doing was not for their own pleasure, as I said before, but mainly to try and do what later we see that God instructed. And that is also different to what happened with Abraham and Sarah, being husband and wife. Although Leviticus chapters 18 says the nakedness of thy sister, the daughter of thy father, or the daughter of thy mother, whether she born in a house, and so forth, or abroad, even their nakedness thou shalt not uncover, we have to put that in perspective. In perspective of Leviticus 18:11. I say, because I made a difference between a half sister and a full sister. We often say, when it says sister, it's about a full sister. So 18:11 says, the nakedness of thy father's wife's daughter, begotten of thy father, she is thy sister. Thou shalt not uncover her nakedness. So both of you have the same appearance on father and mother. The nakedness of thy father's, so he's your father's wife's daughter. So that wife has a daughter, begotten of thy father. So she also has this. She's a daughter of the wife, but she's also begotten of the father. So she's also the daughter of the father as well. You both have the same parents. Okay, so you are not to uncover her nakedness. The more you learn the laws of God, I think the more you're able to distinguish between these little things that may look contradictory. Okay, back to Genesis chapter 38, verse 24. And it came to pass about 3 months after that it was told Judah, saying, Tamar, thy daughter-in-law, hath played a harlot, and also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, Bring her forth, and let her be burnt. And verse 26, and Judah acknowledged them. This is the tokens that she showed that she wasn't playing the harlot, but she performed the law. And Judah acknowledged them and said, She hath been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not Zillah my son. So though Tamar was a Canaanite, she learned and abided by the law of God, of her dead husband and family. Just as like I said in Ruth chapters 1 verse 6, which says, And Ruth said, Thy God shall be my God. Now had Tamar not taken the action she did to protect herself, which was get the pledges of verses 18 and 25, she would have suffered the same fate as later passed through Moses in Leviticus chapters 21:9, which says, And the daughter of any priest, if she profane herself by playing the whore, she profaneth her father, she shall be burnt with fire.
So Tamar coming via Judah, the priestly line, would have suffered that burning rather than a stoning of a normal woman who commits adultery.
How did Judah know of this law about burning her? Because it existed, God's way existed before it was forgotten with them being in Egypt for so long. Now it is this protection reason is also why a man who wrongly puts away his wife, in other words, she has not committed the only reason for putting her away, as Yeshua said, which is fornication, which is not a sexual act but means to going after other gods, because he put her away for illegal, let's say, reason, he has to give her a bill of divorcement. Because without that bill of divorcement, if she went with another man, she would be accused of committing adultery and stoned. So Tamar got herself some tokens to show that she wasn't being a harlot or a whore, and to be burnt outside the law. And also is why a woman who's wrongly put away by her husband is given a bill of divorcement, so that she's not also accused of committing adultery when she goes to find herself another husband. Okay, on to 39 verse 3. This is where Joseph is now in Egypt, sold as a slave. And it says, and his master saw that the Yahweh was with him, and that Yahweh made all that he did to prosper in his hand. Then we jump down to verse 5. And Yahweh blessed the Egyptians' house for Joseph's sake, and the blessings of Yahweh was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. Down to verse 9. When Potiphar's wife tries to seduce Joseph, verse 9 says, there is none, this is what he told her, there is none greater in this house than I. Neither have he, your husband, kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So when we sin, we transgress God's laws and commandments. It's against him, not necessarily the individual, i.e. in this case the husband, we have wronged. There are God's rules that we are violating, so the transgression is against him. And we know sin is transgression of the law, being God's law, because he's the maker of it. So, for example, if we live in the United States, it is the authority that we go against. We'd be breaking America's law. If you live in England, they're the ones who passed the law, so we're going against English law. Last couple of verses, 39:14. Joseph runs away, leaves his coat. She's afraid of being caught out, I suppose. So 14 says, when her husband comes home, that she called unto the men of her house and spake unto them, saying, see, he hath, being her husband, has brought in an Hebrew. So I said before, Abraham was called the first Hebrew, meaning to cross over. And now we have Joseph being called a Hebrew. They are not called Jews, but like Abraham and Paul, I say Hebrews. Paul was called a Hebrew of the Hebrews in Philippians chapter 3 verse 3, and for Abraham's reference it was Genesis 14:13. And the last verse today is Genesis 39:23, when Joseph is put into prison, and it says the keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand or control, because Yahweh was with him, Joseph, and that which he did, Yahweh made it to prosper. So the last point is, if we obey God, he will be with you. So rather than Joseph look to pleasure himself, he looked to seek first the kingdom of heaven, and all things are given to you. Shalom, speak to you tomorrow.